As the years go on, of course, there is no one set path. Things change, trends change, people's minds change, the world keeps on moving, and we keep seeing different ways forward. Of course, different people, different countries, different cultures will choose differently. But something that I've been looking into for more than 20 years is international relocation, trends, what people are doing, where people are going, what people are saying. And I have been noticing in the last, especially year, that there are a lot of people who were once thinking about moving to Portugal, but now looking at the potential of a future in Italy. And as somebody who's lived in both countries, I wanted to share my 2 cents. Of course, I'm Rafael Di Furia. This is another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, and roll that intro. This year, both Italy and Portugal have seen massive changes to citizenship, where Italy has changed a lot to do with citizenship by descent, citizenship through your ancestry, jure sanguinis, jus sanguinis, whereas Portugal has changed citizenship by naturalization, and many people are very, very, very angry at what has been going on, because until recently, Portugal allowed for those who'd been residing in the country for 5 years to be able to make a petition for citizenship, to request naturalization in the country. But that has been going back and forth this year. It's changing. It's not changing. It's going to be 10 years. It's going to be 5 years. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. But now it's looking as though that there could be many people who would have to wait the full 10 years, even if they were already residing in Portugal for 5 years. A lot of complications that I'm not going to go into in this episode, but there are many people who are also looking at Italy. And Italy has had 10 years for naturalization anyway for a long time. But I've been seeing a lot from people online, and even amongst people who I know, who were interested in getting Portuguese citizenship and then potentially moving to another country, that they are now very frustrated because they quote unquote did their time, but now they are not going to potentially be able to get the nationality that was seeming like it was very likely. And I think now we are seeing the culmination of a bunch of different factors that have all come together that made Portugal once look really interesting and really advantageous to move to, but now are kind of different than what they once were and what once was promised. For example, golden visas, NHR, the tax breaks, and the ability to get into the country and easily be there or have an easier path to be able to make Portugal your home. Or even the changes to the visa system where there were a lot of people who were kind of thrown around that would have maybe once had a passive income visa, and now they have to have a digital nomad visa, and it added a lot of confusion. Then it changed from, will the police be handling immigration, to a new office even being created, IMA, and then maybe is it going to be one? Is it going to be the other? Is it going back? Is it going forth? Is the new office going to close? Who's handling what? And documents even I've heard of getting lost in between these two. And this has led to a lot of people now feeling like they are in limbo. And there are a lot of people who are looking at whether they realistically want to stay. And I think unfortunately this has created the situation that we're seeing now, where Portugal made itself very attractive to people, but they weren't necessarily the people who were invested long term. They were invested to be able to get an easy European passport, whether that was just to get the European passport and go to another European country, or to get a European passport and maybe go to somewhere like the US. Of course, during my time in Portugal, I've spoken with many people who've been looking at the Portuguese passport in many different ways and the advantages that can come along with it. So unfortunately, this created an interest in Portuguese nationality that had nothing to do with being Portuguese, at least for many people. But then now we are seeing that Italy, a country that has maybe been a little bit more challenging for those from abroad to be able to make home, now starting to open up and become a lot more advantageous. I mean, there have been plenty of stories recently about the influx of millionaires bringing billions of euros in total into the country that potentially could bring a really interesting economic boom. There are even talks about how London used to be the economic powerhouse of Europe, and now that's switching and kind of transferring over to Milan because of Brexit. It could be just wishful thinking, or it could be the reality. Only time will really tell, but Italy has been putting into place a lot of really interesting systems for those who are wanting to make Italy home. Unless you're someone who has Italian ancestry, whereas in that case, then maybe in some ways it's become a little bit more challenging, but we can see what might be happening next year. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for you guys. But apart from just the legal side, there's the practical side, the day-to-day life. What are you going to be experiencing? Let's move away from some of those things like immigration and taxes. When it comes down to it, Italy and Portugal do actually share some similarities. The slow pace of life can exist in both. They look a little bit different in each one, and maybe you could say that there are certain things in Portugal that are maybe slightly more efficient, but in recent years, things have been getting much better in Italy, and many more services are going online or becoming electronic. Again, we're not going to go into all the nitty-gritty details here, but what will you experience on a day-to-day basis? I won't say that in one country or the other that you're going to get treated so much better or so much worse than the other. I think, though, in maybe Italy, we are talking about a quality of life that can be a little bit higher than Portugal, but we also could say that maybe central to southern Italy in some ways could be on par to what you might find in Portugal. You're going to find really beautiful locations, some in the sea, some in the mountains, some in the countryside. But the cost of living in Portugal has been going up significantly. We've been seeing the cost of living in Porto and Lisbon reaching the prices of probably London and Paris. The cost of what you can purchase there or what you can rent there, yes, prices are now starting to come down, but they are still much, much higher than what they should be. In my personal opinion, moving to Portugal for a low-cost lifestyle doesn't make sense anymore. But maybe with some of the changes that have been made and maybe how things are maybe not going to be as attractive going forward as they once were, you might see that there could be fewer people making their way to Portugal, which could theoretically bring down the cost of living a little bit. But how much will it go down? I don't know. I can't help but wonder if there are certain aspects of what we've seen in the price hike in Portugal as part of a bubble. Of course, everywhere in the world saw prices rise after 2020 and everything that happened during that period. But I would say from what I've been looking at between Portugal and Italy, things have been a bit more stable in Italy. Even if, yes, prices have gone up, we could say that maybe they haven't risen at the same rate as what you have seen in Portugal. But in my personal opinion here, I would say that in many ways, the quality of life in Italy can be a little bit higher than what you might find in Portugal. I'm not saying that, oh, the quality of life in one place or the other is so horrible or so this or so that. No, what I'm saying is that in a kind of general sense, you might be able to find maybe finer dining, or you could find finer quality of clothing. There are different ways in which this might manifest itself. Although I will say it is very hard to compete with the fish market in Portugal. Portuguese fish is out of this world, top notch. But to me, in some ways, it almost feels sometimes as though Portugal is trying to still figure out where it is, what it is, and define its direction. Whereas Italy, in many ways, has been very stable and solid and secure with what it is, what it offers, and what it brings to the world. And the Portuguese have contributed a lot more to the world than many people might realize, especially if we're talking about even food and the influence that it's had in different parts of the world, or even music. I mean, the ukulele, look into it. It's actually quite interesting how the ukulele came to be. But personally, I can't help but have the sense that sometimes it almost feels as though that Portugal is still trying to figure out what is the way forward. There are so many different versions of what that could look like. The left moving in one direction, the right moving in another direction, and the political system really shaking things up with being able to immigrate to the country, what things could look like for the nation. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Italy is so much more politically stable. But I think, though, in Italy, the instability, again, is kind of a status quo sort of thing that people are very used to. And Portugal, I'm not saying that they're not used to it, but from the direction that I see things going currently, not talking about immigration, but talking about making Italy a world player, it is very interesting. Even if you look at Henley and their immigration, their rankings for the years, apparently Italy has jumped up to being like the third place in the world. I mean, used to be people were thinking about going to places like Singapore, but even now Italy is jumping ahead of Singapore. Some of what Italy is offering to businesses and those who maybe have a high net worth is quite fascinating, I would say. And even what they offer to freelancers as well, from the taxation perspective, a few years ago wasn't that interesting, but now is actually shocking what they're even talking about. I mean, if we're going back to 2020, I believe the cap on the flat tax regime was something about like 55 or 65,000 euros. Now they're already talking about bringing it from 85 to 100,000 euros. And I'm not at that level of income, but I've got to say personally, compared to what I was saying even a few years ago about Portugal looking a lot more interesting from a taxation perspective, Italy is getting much more interesting very quickly in a very, very promising way. Of course, this is just my perspective, and I'm not a financial advisor, but just as an individual who's been around the world, living in different countries and exploring what it is and always keeping an ear to the ground when it comes to international immigration. Before 2020 and the years leading up, I was seeing that Italy was kind of the main focus. That was one of the big destinations that people were really wanting to go to. The average person was trying to see how that they could make Italy home. And then in the few years before 2020, there was a growing interest in Portugal because of the tax regimes that they were offering, like NHR, for example. And then, of course, during 2020 and a couple years after, I was seeing that boom was just really continuing to grow. Although, in the last maybe year and a half, 2 years, I've been noticing a little bit of a difference, and things aren't quite going on that same trajectory that they once were. I've been seeing that shift back into more of an interest in Italy. And for those of you who've been wondering why I haven't been speaking about Portugal as much recently, is because, unfortunately, with a YouTube channel like this, I do kind of have to follow where the interests go that people have. And of course, originally, a lot of you subscribed with an interest in information and discussions on life in Italy and what's going on in the country. So that's why, even though I'm planning to talk about many other different places, that there has been a large shift back into talking about Italy. But even for me, personally, I feel as though there's a lot more that I have to say about Italy than I do Portugal. I know both countries pretty decently, and I know how things work in both countries pretty decently as well. Still, of course, plenty to learn. But for me, in Italy, there's just some part of me when I go there that comes alive. There's something deep inside of me that even some of you guys have left comments or sent me private messages about, wow, there's something different about when you do those videos in Italy, or when you're talking about Italy, there's a spark, there's something there. And even I've noticed it. Sometimes even when I'm editing through the videos, I can feel that there's something different about when I am focusing a video on Italy than when I'm focusing on another country. I'm interested in all these international topics. If I had no interest, then I wouldn't have even started this YouTube channel. But there's something particular about Italy. Even for all of the imperfections that exist, there are still many wonderful qualities that it has. I'm not saying that it's better than Portugal, and for some people, they actually may find that Portugal is a much better fit for them. And I'm not saying for me, though, that Italy or Portugal is a better fit. They just fit differently. Maybe to put it in terms of hats, something that probably most of you have noticed in the videos throughout the years, that I wear many different hats, both figuratively and literally. Some of them might be a little bit more comfortable, but I'm not crazy necessarily about exactly how it looks and how it fits and how it all goes together. But there might be some other hats that might not necessarily be the best fit, but I enjoy the way that it looks. And I think when we are coming to find a country for us, we have to find something that works just in the right way. There's never going to be one perfect place or one perfect fit for everybody, because it could very well end up being that neither country are right for you in the end. And it's worthwhile to explore both. But what I can say about both countries is that there is plenty to explore. Although with Italy being a much larger country, it sometimes does feel like there's a lot more to explore from north to south. Granted, of course, in Portugal, you have a large difference between different places and the people from those regions. Or if you go out to the islands like the Azores, for example, you're talking about a whole different way of living and a whole different way of being. You're still in Portugal, but it's just a different flavor of Portugal. But in Italy, just on the peninsula alone, not even thinking about the islands, not thinking about Sardinia or even Sicily, just on the main part of the peninsula, you have a very, very wide variety of different types of experiences that you can have. And even though it's hard to say that one place offers more than the other, maybe in Italy, you can find a lot more of a difference between the different places. Both places offer rich, beautiful history. But of course, in Italy, you maybe have a little bit more of an advantage just because we're talking about the heart of the Roman Empire. Not that Portugal doesn't have its own Roman ruins, but Colosseum's a Colosseum at the end of the day. But even though the past might not define the future, it is worthwhile looking at, and it does kind of shape where things are in the moment. But if we are talking about the future, if I were a betting man, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe Italy might be the safer bet for maybe more stability and more of an interesting place in the long term moving forward. I think in Portugal, it has a lot of potential, and there are a lot of great things about it. But right now, there's a lot that's uncertain. And what things might look like, it could really go in a few different directions, and I don't think any of them are clear. Whereas with Italy, it almost does feel as though that there is a particular trajectory that the country might be headed in. At least that's my opinion. Even earlier this year during the summer, I had mentioned that I was thinking about in the next years, I don't know how many years, that I would end up moving back to Italy. But with seeing what's happening now, I'm wondering if maybe it's worthwhile thinking about moving up those plans. Even if you are an EU citizen, again, I'm a dual citizen, dual nationality, US and Italy. I will say there is actually something really nice about being a citizen of a country and being in that country. Even being the citizen of an EU country, living in another EU country, it's not quite the same. There's some sort of little difference, I can say, at the end of the day, that when you are in your country and not thinking about, well, what if the situation changes? What if there's another Brexit, an Italexit, a Portugalexit, a Splexit, whatever it could be? If things start changing, are you going to have to think about what your future may look like? And being a citizen of a nation, residing in the nation of your nationality, I would say in this day and age, is very undervalued. And I can't help but get the feeling that it could be possible that in the next years, we might see the importance of citizenship and where you are calling home. But that goes off in a very different direction for a very different video. So I'm going to round things out here. Of course, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Thank you to those of you who support this channel through Patreon on a monthly basis and make this project possible. And of course, thank you to those of you who help with the one-time support through Patreon, patreon.com/Rafael Di Furia, rafaeldifuria.com/Patreon, as well as a huge thank you to those of you who share your thoughts down in the comments section below. But of course, I'm Rafael Di Furia. This has been another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I will see you all next time. Later.